Welcome to Culture Talk, where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I am joined today with Dr. Kyle Keltz. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You are a professor of English and philosophy at South Plains College, and we are going to be talking about kind of a fun question. How do we know that humans have souls? So I'm very excited to talk about this because we're talking about souls. It's a cool topic. So as we start to explore this topic of souls, some people might say, is it even rational to believe that humans have souls? So how do you respond to that?
There's several philosophical arguments for the existence of the soul, but one of my favorite is kind of almost the opposite of what you're saying. I would argue that it's actually irrational to believe that you don't have a soul. C.S. Lewis is famous for formulating an argument along these lines. We call it the argument from reason. He wrote about it in Miracles. And what he emphasizes is that rationality, right? When you say, well, I looked at the evidence and I believe this. What we assume in the rational process is that you are able to understand the evidence and that you make a decision. Do I believe this evidence warrants this decision or this decision? And so you make a conclusion on a rational basis. Now, if you don't have a soul, though, and you're completely physical, an issue with that is that if you are completely physical, then everything about you is going to be controlled by the laws of nature. So even that would include all the decisions that you've made. So if you don't think you have a soul, you say something like, I don't believe we have souls. Well, an issue with that is that you reach that conclusion for physical reasons, not for rational reasons. We think that only if you have this immaterial soul, that's this intellect and a will that's not subject to the laws of nature, are you able to have free will and able to reason to conclusions based on evidence.
Interesting. So when we talk about it being irrational to believe that we don't have a soul, then how do we jump to the next conclusion? Okay, we do have souls, and it is more rational to believe that we do have souls. How do we make a distinction between how humans behave and that sort of soulish behavior and how maybe some hominids behave, and if that is also soulish behavior or demonstrating that they have a soul?
Oh, yes. And this is one thing I love talking to my students about in our philosophy classes is the difference between humans and animals. And today we talk about the difference between humans and Neanderthals and hominids and stuff like that. Actually goes pretty far back in Western philosophy. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, in a work called On the Soul, De Anima, he argued that the main difference between humans and non-human animals is that humans are able to take in universal abstract concepts. And it's an interesting argument that philosophers still defend today called the storage problem argument. And it mainly revolves around how are human beings able to understand, to know, basically to store universal concepts. And when I say universal concepts, I mean things like justice or triangularity, or even like things like redness, And to explain it, one thing when I'm talking to my students about universals, when we talk about metaphysics, is I present an example of like a fire truck and an apple, right? And I say, okay, so this fire truck is red, this apple is red, but noting that physical things can't be in more than one place at one time, what would we say redness is, And everyone realizes, okay, well, redness itself can't be some physical thing. It can't be some particular. It's this universal, abstract, immaterial concept. Well, now an issue is you can't store a universal in a physical thing, right? Because if you have this concept, this abstract form in some particular physical thing, then it just is that thing, right?
Right.
When you look at a triangle, for example, you see a triangle, you don't see triangularity, but you abstract that concept of triangularity from triangle. So anyway, long story short, the difference between animals and non-human animals is that we can take in these universals and we think that there has to be something immaterial about us to be able to store that, right? Because we know these concepts. It's not just information flowing through us that we don't have a grasp on. And that's not only shows us that we do have a soul, but it shows the main difference between us and animals, or us and Neanderthals, or something like that. We have this ability to take in universal abstract concepts, and you can use that ability to not only understand things, but also to apply meaning. So you can, that's what makes language possible.
Yeah.
That's what makes technology possible, art, religion, all these things that necessarily involve abstract thinking.
Right. So we're talking about then the distinction between animals and humans would be kind of that symbolic ability to use symbols and to have abstract thought, correct?
Yes, and theologically, maybe even more importantly, the idea that we have an immaterial soul, like I mentioned earlier, it makes it possible so we are moral. You know, we have a choice between our decisions, so there's one way we ought to act and one we ought not to act. But also we think that because the soul is immaterial, it is something that can survive the death of our bodies and make the afterlife possible. You know, a major difference between humans and animals is that we have souls and they don't, or they don't have souls like we do anyways.
Right. Well, there's a lot to talk about with this topic, and I know that you're going to be talking with Jeff a little bit later on diving more into the topic of Neanderthal behavior and how that's distinct from humans, particularly from the scientific discoveries of music and burials and such. But I do want to kind of wrap it up by asking, like, how do we have this conversation with others if you're trying to share your faith with someone? How do you use the topic of soul to do so?
Oh yeah, and I think it has great application with apologetics, but also mainly in evangelism. You know, if you're sharing your faith with someone, or just in a, you know, just friends with someone or whatever out in public, a lot of times when people are doing evangelism, they lead with the question, what do you think happens when we die? Now, in our culture, you might end up meeting a lot of people who are going to say, absolutely nothing. I don't think anything happens when we die because we're just physical. And I think that if you, you know, have a rudimentary grasp of some of these arguments for the existence of the soul, you can lead with that, and at the very least, you know, put a rock in their shoe, have them thinking about, you know, well, maybe there is more to me than just the material. Maybe I will survive the death of my body, and maybe that can lead to further conversations where you can, you know, lead into the gospel and other things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that again. It's a very deep topic, lots to unpack. If you want to hear more about this topic, go to reasons.org and search soul.